Benedict, what is your reaction to Netanyahu saying Iran will pay?
Well, I think he says what he means, ultimately, not like the Iranians who say we're going to bring absolute death and destruction and wipe Israel off the face of the earth and then don't. I think he's a man who actually keeps his promises, and, you know, he has, I think, been roundly blamed for security failures on October the 7th. He didn't want this war to start, but I think he absolutely intends to see it through, that Israel's enemies will be decapitated or handicapped to the best of his abilities before he leaves, and that means Iran, ultimately, as well as Hezbollah and the others. I don't yet know, I don't know exactly what the response will be. It won't be, there's no suggestion of a ground invasion or anything like that in Iran. It will be sort of surgical strikes from abroad, but the operations in Lebanon will continue.
The distance is huge.
Iran is vast.
No, but the distance to Iran,
I know that the distance,
and Iran,
but it's a country that even the United States would say, look, that's a really tough place to actually send troops into. The scale of the country is vast. The terrain is like Afghanistan. It's very difficult. But in terms of what's currently going on, the campaign in Lebanon will continue unabated. And at some point, yes, there will be strikes on military installations, nuclear installations, possibly also oil in Iran.
Well, you say again, we talked about this quite a lot, haven't we? Because we understand that reports in America are saying that the Israelis made it clear to the Iranians, you know, if you do strike us, we are going to strike oil installations and your nuclear installations, trying to develop, obviously, a nuclear weapon. Israel has a nuclear weapon, but doesn't really, never admit
Can neither confirm
nor deny. I think we're pretty sure
but
they do have it.
the Samson option exists, and it's terrifying.
But they have already destroyed oil depots and installations in Yemen, which is a lot further away. There's no doubt at all they know how to do it. You're very concerned about the implication of this, even though we don't buy Iranian oil because of the embargo on the mullahs. We have got Iranian oil is on the world market, sold not just to China, other countries. And as you mentioned earlier, you know, as we've seen, you know, British luxury cars, they're not allowed to be sold to Russia. No, you sell them to Kazakhstan, and then miraculously, loads of them end up. Who knew? A load of them end up there. But even actually also, you know, Russian oil being sold to India, and then we suddenly start buying a lot of oil from India. You know, a lot of these things are ways of getting around, and also because, again, so many of our people in charge of these things are just utterly incompetent and hopeless. They're not on top of these things. I'm sorry, how else do you explain it? But also, by the way, our allies, again, countries like India, pick a side, because we will remember. But this is where we are. So, but there is a concern, obviously, the impact of oil spikes, of if Iran retaliates to other oil producers in the Middle East. I mean, would they be willing to risk that? But that will have an impact, you were saying, way bigger than the impact on our oil prices or energy prices than Ukraine.
First and foremost, if you take the Iranian oil off the market, then it means that people who do buy it need to buy oil from elsewhere, which increases the price. Then there's the simple logistics.
Because there's more demand for the same supply.
More demand for a smaller supply. And then you have the issue, which is that a lot of oil that actually gets through the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman has to come through the same waterway as the Iranian stuff anyway. And not a lot of these countries are particularly friendly towards Iran. So Iraq, Kuwait, the UAE, Bahrain, that's all going to be interrupted. So that'll then have a knock-on effect on the price. And that's if Iran doesn't decide to strike oil installations in those countries, which it could very well do and has threatened to do if the Israelis attack its oil infrastructure. There's an added aspect to that, which is that some countries, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, but actually Azerbaijan as well, which is one that people don't think about, but does supply a lot of oil to Europe, that has a military alliance now with Israel. So actually that would potentially be a military target for the Iranians as well. So all of a sudden, there's it's not just one country's oil, it's an entire, you know, it's about 75% of all of OPEC's production. That's quite a lot.
We need to think about that. Well, look, let's go back there to the Ayatollah Khamenei in Iran, the supreme leader in Iran. Yesterday, 7:40 UK time, he tweeted, "With God's help, the blows of the uprising front will become stronger and more painful on the worn and rotting body of the Zionist regime." And we forgot to.
He has a way with words.
He does. We've got to add, you know, death to Israel, death to America, you know, the usual stuff. You know, how's that working out, though? When we've seen the Iranians, we've seen not only their proxies in Hamas and in Hezbollah really, you know, facing mass destruction. We've seen the annihilation of so many supreme commanders in Hezbollah and Hamas, and indeed in Tehran's, you know, military as well, Revolutionary Guard and others. Yesterday, the second major attack, 300 missiles and drones and other attacks in April. No deaths. No, I think there was one death, a young girl, I believe. Last night, 0 Israelis died, 1 Palestinian. There's an extraordinary bit of footage of a rocket that was shot out of the sky, falling to the ground and hitting a Palestinian.
So not
man.
even a successful strike,
Right.
one that was intercepted.
No, exactly. And 5 Iranians back on Iranian territory who were killed. I mean, you know, the strong words from the Iranians, strong words we've seen, you know, from Hezbollah and Hamas, but it doesn't look like they've got the means to actually deliver a threat to Israel.
A lot of their military technology is very out of date. They have a lot of it. They can sort of, it's a bit like with Hezbollah. They have hundreds of thousands of launchers, but it doesn't mean that it's particularly up-to-date kit.
Is this the same as with Russia in Ukraine, that everyone assumed they're this, you know, and actually an awful lot of their kit doesn't work. They haven't got the maintenance.
A lot of it is old. A lot of it also isn't tested. There was also a problem with the Russians, is that they hadn't actually tested to see if any of this stuff worked in about 10, 15 years.
Don't worry, none of our stuff works either.
Don't worry, because we sometimes do try and test it and it doesn't work, as with our nuclear submarine launch just a couple of weeks ago. But it's one of those things where the scale is what is concerning. It's not so much whether or not they have state-of-the-art stuff, it's can they throw sort of overwhelming numbers and overwhelm the Iron Dome system or any of the other systems, which theoretically is possible, but you notice they've not actually tried to do that. And for all of also Hezbollah's big talk about what it's going to do, supposedly having hundreds of thousands of missiles, it's not tried to do that either. Which suggests they're not very confident about its capability.
Yeah, indeed. Well, look, let's have a little watch and listen of what Keir Starmer had to say last night, of course, when British military did get involved in helping to protect Israel, which I know a lot of people in this country, maybe people at the BBC don't understand, is actually our ally. But here's what the Prime Minister had to say.
But I utterly condemn this attempt by the Iranian regime to harm innocent Israelis, to escalate this incredibly dangerous situation and push the region ever closer to the brink. It cannot be tolerated. We stand with Israel and we recognise her right to self-defence in the face of this aggression.
That's what Keir Starmer had to say. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, going much further. Here's what he said.
Iran made a major mistake this evening, and it will pay for it. The regime in Iran just doesn't understand our determination to defend ourselves and our determination to retaliate to our enemies. Sinwar and Def did not understand that. Nasrallah and Mohsen did not understand that. And I guess there are those who do not understand that in Tehran. But they will. We are going to adhere to the rule that we set for ourselves. Those who attack us, we attack them.
I mean, it's just kind of straightforward and simple, that, isn't it? I mean, this is just realpolitik. And yet we've got so many people, you know, the likes of the BBC, and we spoke about them a bit earlier, and the incredible bias that, you know, anyone who does anything from, you know, that isn't Hezbollah, Hamas, or Iran, you know, is a warmonger. But actually, there is no country in the world you'd expect to take an attack like that and not retaliate and go, oh, well, fair enough then.
Europe has become incredibly insulated from the realities of war, and you know there have been wars in Europe, and even now people sort of cling to the fantasies about proportionality or international law being adhered to. It doesn't happen in these things. You know, Srebrenica, you know, the Balkan conflict, what's happening in Ukraine, on our doorsteps these things happened. There was no proportionality, there was none of that sort of thing, and yet we still seem to think, oh, we can get Middle Eastern countries to just somehow magically become Western democracies and cling to these ideas. Wars are fought on the basis of using overwhelming force to prevent your enemies destroying you. I don't know what's complex about this.
I've never understood this. The amount of people we've had on, who guests and callers who insist, absolutely completely insist that, you know, you only end wars by getting around the table. As we just spoke to Hamish de Bretton Gordon, actually military man. No, actually, no, most wars don't end like that. Most wars end with someone winning. Well, then you might get round the table. I mean, you know, Treaty of Versailles.
Did we use proportionality when it came to the Japanese? No, we visited hell and death on them. What about the Germans? 2 million German civilians were killed in the Second World War. Not talking about the people who were sent to camps, civilians just living their lives. That was Allied bombing. That was Soviet soldiers.
And knowing they were doing that.
And nobody sits here and goes, the West, oh, dreadful, shouldn't have done that. No, because you needed to defeat the worst.
The terrible thing is there are people in the West
there's a few. There's a few.
But
most people accept that it's not the done thing.
And what did you make? I mean, again, I spoke a little bit earlier. Do go back and have a look. It's on our YouTube page. It's also on our social media pages, on Twitter and the like. The BBC being criticised again and again and again, and actually having reports after again and again about basically terrorist sympathisers, apologists for Hamas or Hezbollah or indeed the Iranians, basically not being challenged, often by, you know, Today programme presenters. You know, these are the top presenters, news presenters in the BBC, but the reports by many of their top Middle East correspondents, the Jeremy Bowens and others, and just incredible bias being shown. Now, I mean, I would disapprove of them showing bias, even if it was something I agreed with. That's not their job. You want neutral positions. But the treatment of Israel as a pariah state, as a war criminal state, as the aggressor, constantly, with a little bit of lip service paid to the 7th of October massacre, the constant obsession with what is going on in terms of the victims, which of course are an important matter in war. But again, that wasn't the obsession when they had their reporters, embedded, for Iraq, Afghanistan, or any other war with the British military. That wasn't how they reported those wars.
No, there's always a double standard when it comes to Israel. And it must be said that the Israelis tend to give as good as they get. They're often, when Israeli or Israeli-leaning guests go on international news stations, they are prepared, they have the facts, they don't sort of revert back to xenophobia or stereotypes or anything like that. But it must be said, a lot of people on the other side do, and they're not challenged on it. And part of you sort of wonders, is it because there's sympathy in these news organisations for the narrative of the oppressor versus the oppressed? Or is it because there's an understanding that if you give these people too much room to walk, they will just come out with the most unbelievable xenophobic stuff and they'll end the interviews early and they'll misbehave? Is it in fact that Israel, because it does its homework and its people do their homework, they can be held to a higher standard because they're actually doing it on face value, whereas their opponents quite literally don't care about
and
that.
I had almost 17,500 complaints to Ofcom. Rather proud of that, by the way, complaining about apparently it's racist to challenge a Palestinian leader who had openly celebrated the October the 7th massacre within days. I mean, when we definitely knew what had happened, we definitely knew that civilians had been attacked and raped and mutilated and murdered and that hostages had been taken. He'd openly celebrated it. And when I clashed with him and I basically said I thought we had a problem with women arguing with him. I've watched a lot of his interviews, and I have to say I'm happy to stand by my view at the time of what he had to say. He had an interview with Michelle Hussein on Radio 4, and he had a huge number of complaints about that, and they were upheld against her. I mean, I'm sorry, but that in terms of literally just like allowing this guy to spout his nonsense, refusing to condemn October 7th, which is such a giveaway. It is the giveaway.
But
all right-thinking people.
This actually goes back to a domestic political issue that we've been talking about recently, which is Kemi Badenoch talking about the validity of different cultures versus others. Therein is an aspect of one culture where it is very commonplace to not see women as equal citizens. Why is it unacceptable to point that out to people? But a lot of people at the BBC would say, no, all cultures are equal and should be treated on an equal basis, when clearly they're not.
I mean, again, anyone who thinks that all cultures are both equal, the same, and morally valid, frankly, is an idiot.
That the Sudanese and the Sentinelese are the same as the Swedes and the Spanish. No, it's clearly not the case.
And also, we really, really need to work on all those huge number of people leaving democracies constantly to go and with Western values, to go and live
to
in
flee
these. That's my thing. If you want to live in a regime where you've got Sharia law, or you've got this sort of subjugation of women
or
and
Vladimir
gay people,
Putin,
you want to do that? Off you go. Bye-bye, we'll all contribute to plane ticket. I mean, whether you're a convert or not, you're born, I don't care. Whatever your view, there are plenty of countries that share those views. You don't get to impose those views on people here in this country. It seems to be very, very simple. Just before we go to break, I wanted to ask you about Keir Starmer travelling to Brussels. He wants to reset our relations. People accusing him of cozying up to Eurocrats, but can we reset our relations with Europe? I
mean, we probably can if we give them something expensive that we probably shouldn't give them for what we get in return.
Well, I tell you what, Keir Starmer's got a wardrobe full of very expensive suits.
He does.
Maybe he could.
Although the average Italian politician would point out that the amount of money he spent might get you 2 Brunello Cucinelli suits at best. He's not doing it how Eurocrats do it, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, he needs to Berlusconi up on this.
They have their snouts in the trough to a much greater extent even than Keir Starmer.
Certainly the ones in Brussels do. Maybe he's just going to Europe to get some tips on how to live the life of Riley on all these other donors and all these expenses. That's what he's been doing.